Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to film a video that I filmed last year. Today I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on controversial topics that you guys are interested in. Some of you guys have some really hot takes, so I'm really excited. The release of The Idol. So The Idol is The Weeknd's new show. He had announced it a few years ago and he worked on the show with Sam Levinson, the director of Euphoria. There's been a lot of controversy with this show and I've heard a lot of opinions. Most of them are negative. I don't think I've heard one good thing about this show. Originally, when I heard about this project a few years ago, I was really excited because I am a Weeknd stan. I love After Hours and it seems like The Idol is basically the story behind After Hours but coming alive in a show. But as soon as Sam Levinson got added to that project, I knew it was gonna go downhill. The thing about Sam Levinson is the guy is notorious for having a very disturbing mind, and I think it just really comes through in a lot of his projects like Euphoria and The Idol. Everyone that's watched the show has told me not to watch it, and to be honest, I really don't think I can bring myself to watch it. I think this is just also another case where a lot of people are up in arms about nepotism. I think a lot of people are frustrated with the fact that Abel should have just stayed in his own lane. He makes great music, but that doesn't necessarily mean he should be an actor. Not everyone can be multi-talented, and I think it's really difficult to see celebrities that you look up to that are super talented go for things that come across as almost like a cash grab. What are your guys' thoughts on The Idol? I'm curious, especially for those of you guys who've actually seen it. Cats are disgusting. This is my friend Sophia. She has a huge fear of cats. Can we just normalize not being obsessed with animals? I feel like especially in the US, like people here are so obsessed with their cats and dogs. It's not that I hate animals, it's just that I don't care. Like if someone comes up to me and shows me a picture of their dog and starts ranting about how cute their dog is, I'm gonna look at the picture and be like, okay, it's just a dog, you know? People who still use Snapchat should be embarrassed. I left Snapchat a few years ago. I think I left it when I graduated high school. To be honest, I just downloaded the app because everyone my age was on it when I was in high school, but it was never an app that I necessarily loved. I feel like just keeping up with things like streaks put way too much pressure on me. In general, I didn't really use the app too much. It definitely wasn't my favorite form of social media. And so I just felt bad at a certain point because people would snap me and it would take me like 10 days to open the snap. Ever since I deleted the app, I really haven't missed it. I think that there are so many social media apps out there these days that like you really can't just be on every social media app, and you really shouldn't feel the pressure to be on every social media app. I think also too, I definitely feel like when I view Snapchat, it just reminds me of like middle school, late middle school, high school era. It's just not an app for me, and I feel like also just the app in general definitely does give a little bit younger. Like when I think of Snapchat, I'm thinking of like the new generation of Gen Z. What are they called? Like Gen Alpha or something like that? If you tell me that you're on Snapchat, it's a red flag. Affirmative action being overturned. It was really disheartening to see. I can't say that I was surprised, to be honest. Currently in the US, the Supreme Court has a 6-3 swing, 6 being in favor of conservatives, and so that has resulted in a lot of the political change that has happened in the past few years, including Roe v. Wade being overturned and now affirmative action being overturned. Affirmative action is such an interesting subject to talk to people about because I feel like people actually do not know really how it works, and people are misinformed a lot of the times when it comes to affirmative action. Sometimes when I interact with people coming from California and going to a UC school, people don't realize that like affirmative action hasn't been in play in California for years. In the 1978 case Regents of the University of California versus Bake, it ruled that racial quotas were unconstitutional and that, quote, no applicant may be rejected because of his race in favor of another who is less qualified, as measured by standards applied without regard to race. But it is also approved affirmative action to promote diversity, so long as race was only one factor among many that came under consideration in admissions. What this means is that in the state of California, applicants cannot be accepted into a university purely because of race. The applicants must be qualified or just as qualified as other applicants that are being considered. Overturning affirmative action, whether or not you agree with whether it should be in place, was a major overstepping of the Supreme Court, and I think that the choice to implement affirmative action should be a decision for state governments to implement on like a state-to-state basis. Getting rid of it across the board is really, really damaging. As someone who does go to a UC school and sees such a racial disparity, it's even more disheartening just to see. It's such an assault on progress. This decision in essence is making it so something like race that is a fact that exists in all of our lives, that plays into all of our lives, is essentially going to be ignored in college admissions processes. And a lot of the times I think people, when they think of affirmative action, they're thinking of, you know, Black and brown students, quote unquote, taking away spots from white students. But it's not that. It's more so that if you have two applicants that on paper are equally the same in terms of stats, in terms of numbers, race is something to consider when you're looking at both applicants, because race plays a role in all of our lives. Race causes people to have different life experiences, and race causes people to have a lot of the times different challenges that they have to overcome to even just get to the same place as someone who has more privilege in this racial system. And so to see that just completely be something that can't even be considered or can't even be brought up in college admissions is so sad. And it's honestly so hypocritical, especially since, you know, the people that actually do gain an advantage in the college system, the people whose parents buy them buildings, the people whose parents donate to universities across the country, those people are still going to continue to benefit from that system. Sunni versus Shia. This is a debate that I just personally detest. It's so disheartening to hear about violence against certain sects, the Muslim community. If you guys don't know what Sunni and Shia are, there are two major branches of Islam, like two major sects of Islam. There's Sunni and there's Shia. Since Shias are the minority in the Muslim world, there's often a lot of violence or just a lot of discrimination towards Shia Muslims. And it's really disheartening because we're all Muslims at the end of the day, and like that's all that should matter. But unfortunately, a lot of the times that's not all that matters. In a lot of Muslim spaces, discrimination does happen. That is probably one of the most un-Islamic things to see. My family, I guess, would consider ourselves Sunni, but it wasn't something that necessarily played a huge role in my relationship with Islam. Like, I personally don't feel a huge attachment to being a Sunni Muslim. I feel like I identify as a Muslim first and foremost. Even myself, like, I didn't even realize like what actually was the difference between Sunni and Shia Muslims were until like a few years ago, I want to say. And so for me, it's not like a huge player in my life, but I know there's a lot of discrimination towards Shia Muslims, a lot of outcasting of Shia Muslims, especially in like spaces like MSA or orgs on campus. Is Avatar Korra stronger than Avatar Aang? Oh my gosh. Can I just go on a rant about this? I always talk about this with my sister because we see things in the same way. My sisters and I grew up huge fans of the Avatar The Last Airbender TV series. It was a cornerstone of my childhood, of my sister's childhood, and so I was so excited when they had their little reboot moment a few years ago, I think around 2012-ish, when they released The Legend of Korra and they had a female Avatar. I was so excited. Okay, watched the series, really enjoyed it, and then I think this discourse, like this anti-Korra discourse, really kind of, I feel like, arose recently with the second wave of Avatar when TikTok got released. Basically, when TikTok came out, Avatar became hugely popular again, and this new wave of people rediscovered the world of Avatar. Naturally, after they finished Avatar The Last Airbender, they started watching The Legend of Korra. And I feel like a lot of this discourse really resurged around then because everyone just became very anti-Korra, because her character in the show is someone who's very hot-headed and very decisive, and she makes a lot of mistakes. She is a very flawed character, and she's just very reactive, which is like the opposite of like Aang's character at all. I feel like there's almost this like demonization of her as a character because of these qualities, when like these are all qualities that like any human being would have. And I think Two, people do forget that she's literally 16 years old, I think, in this show. Like, she's literally just a teenage girl. I think a lot of the times in society, people are way more harsh on teenage girls and young girls especially, and they're just so quick to like demonize young girls. I think young girls are not allowed to make the same mistakes as young men. And so a lot of people hate on Korra. They just completely forget, you know, all of the growth that she goes through over the course of the 4 seasons of the show. And even if you like compare, for example, like all of the challenges that she faces across the 4 seasons, like when it really comes down to it, she had like a different villain that she had to fight in every season across 4 seasons, whereas Aang had one villain that he had 3 seasons to overcome. She went through so much, and I think you do see how much she's grown as a character by the end of the show, that it is just so admirable. So I think Aang and Korra as avatars are incomparable. First of all, even just like who they are fundamentally as human beings, like they're diametrically like 2 different people, but also just the circumstances that they're faced throughout the show is like completely different. And I respect both characters and both avatars for different reasons, but I think to just sit here and demonize Korra and like be like, ugh, like she's so hot-headed, she's just so annoying, it's like, but really stop and think about like everything that she goes through and how much she's changed by the end of the show. Kind of related to this topic, how are you guys feeling about the live action that's supposed to come out? I'm actually like really not excited for it. I've changed my perspective on things. Like, I was really excited when they first announced it, I think a year or 2 ago, because, you know, I feel like in 2010 they just jumped on the live action game way too quickly. The CGI wasn't ready for it. At first I was thinking like, nowadays we have so much better CGI. Like, even if you're thinking of like Marvel movies and things like that, there's just so much better CGI for this type of project. But I don't know what it was. I think it really was like seeing like the release of like all of the actors they picked and the casting and everything, and also just like thinking about the way Avatar: The Last Airbender was as a show. I really don't think the live action is going to be able to live up to it, and in my mind I'm still just a little confused as to why they're even going for something like a live action. I feel like the producers should just be focus on adapting the comics, if anything, or they should focus on producing like a new spin-off show with a new avatar, something else other than a live action. I just don't necessarily see this live action being successful. I'm hoping it comes out good. Like, I'm definitely rooting for it. I want it to be a good movie, but I have my expectations in hell, because I feel like when it comes to things like this, when it comes to live actions, like not everything is meant to become a live action. And I think that a lot of the times, like right now, producers really want to turn things that are very popular and that have a huge fan base into a live action, because you have that like automated audience that's gonna watch it. And there's just been so many live actions coming out recently, but like not every live action is successful. Is being gay a choice? It's not. I don't know why people would think this, especially given the way that society is structured and the way that society discriminates against gay people. Is community college for 2 years better than a 4-year at a university? I think it has pros and cons. There's no answer that's gonna be good for everyone. I think you really have to like reflect on like what you want out of college, what are your needs, and just like think about those things. Think about like, make a list of like your priorities, like what you want out of college, and choose the path that's going to be most fulfilling of those needs and of what you want and need out of college. It's not going to be like a simple answer for everyone. I do think that more people should consider going to community college and transferring, or just even if you're someone who ends up going to a 4-year university and don't end up liking it, like pushing yourself to take the steps to actually transfer out, because it is so worth it. Coming from someone who actually did it, like it is so worth it. And it can be really easy to like settle in the moment, to settle for a 4-year university, to settle for somewhere you know you're not going to be happy. But in the long run, you owe it to yourself to push yourself and to sacrifice to get to where you want to be. And I think a lot of the times there's just like this disbelief in ourselves that we won't be able to do it, that we won't be able to make things happen. But you just have to have trust in yourself, have trust in the law that like things are going to work out the way that they're meant to. You're going to end up where you are meant to, and you have to give yourself the chance to get there. Community college was something for me that I didn't really consider when I was in high school. I wasn't really open to it. I had kind of like a stigma against it when I felt like there was a stigma against it when I was in high school. I remember actually when I was a sophomore in high school, I wanted to do the thing where like exit high school early. Like I wanted to basically like get my GED, exit after my sophomore year, go to community college early for 2 years and then transfer. And I remember asking my parents because one of my friends had done it. My parents said no. Because at the time they definitely themselves like had adopted this like stigma against community college themselves. And it's funny because like after I went to college and after they like started talking to people and they just like learned more about like how college works in this country, they like completely changed their mind and changed their perspectives. In the end, it still ended up working out, but it's definitely something that I wish that I had more of an open mind of when I was in high school. And it's something that I personally encourage like everyone to just have more of an open mind. Like that's advice that I gave to my younger sisters when they were going through the college process, is like really think about it. Like you can go to a 4-year university if that's what you want. You can do it. Like anyone can do that. But do you want to go to just like any 4-year university, or do you want to go to the school that like you're gonna like your dreams are gonna come alive at? Climate change, again, this is just something that I don't understand why there are certain people that just don't believe in climate change. I think a lot of the times it really is like, sometimes it's just flat out ignorance, but like sometimes I genuinely think it's like people just ignoring what is a reality in our society because that is what best benefits them in their situation. So like people that come from a background where they are highly privileged and benefit off of burning fossil fuels, like people who come from rich families that are involved in the coal industry, like it benefits them for them to just deny the fact that climate change exists. And I think that's why it's just so important to be a compassionate and empathetic person, to be able to see past your own selfish desires. I think that is really just the result of people putting their own lives, putting their own benefit above the benefit and the good of collective society. And I think actually this is something interesting because this week on Disclaimers Aside, I recorded a podcast episode on individualism versus collective community, like just thinking about and comparing Western society that is very individualistic, that is hyper independent, that pushes us from a young age to be ambitious, to pursue our dreams, to build our careers, like to build our lives for one another, but also on the flip side tends to be very selfish and like prioritize like our own happiness above and our own well-being over the good of collective society, versus more collective communities that you often see in like Eastern societies where society is really thinking about like the collective good, the collective community. You know, it takes a village to raise a child, multiple families like living together, like having multi-generational homes, just having more of like a community support system and just really thinking about one another rather than just like thinking about the individual. But anyways, that was this week's discussion on Disclaimers Aside, my podcast. So I feel like that's just interesting to think about climate change because, you know, when you think about it, I think like the countries that contribute the most to greenhouse gases are Western, more individualistic societies. Samsung is a better phone than Apple. You know what? I'm gonna give it to you. For years, I've heard the whole thing that like Android phones are better than Apple. Maybe they are. For me, it's like the design of Apple. I really like the design of Apple, and I think also just like the simplicity of it and just the whole fact that like most of the world is using Apple. Isn't it just easier to be on the same system as other people? I mean, maybe you want to be different. Maybe you want to have an Android phone and you want to be on a different system. But I personally, the conveniency of being able to make a shared album with someone or like airdrop a photo, it's just so much easier than like switching over to Android. So I'm an Apple girl. I will be an Apple girl till the day I die. Will continue like watering the plants of my Apple ecosystem, even if I know that Android is probably better. I am curious though whether or not Apple will die eventually, because I feel like Apple has just been such like a monopoly for so long that it feels like it's just the default. Like there's not gonna be another major competitor as good as Apple. Like as much as Samsung is probably a great company and has great devices. Like, I just don't see it as comparable as Apple. How can we buy a gun at 18 but not drink till 21? Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm Muslim, so I don't really drink, but I do think that criminalizing alcohol and drugs, like certain alcohol and drugs, it really doesn't make sense a lot of the times, especially like given other types of laws. Like, you know, when you're 18, you can buy a gun. When you're 18, you can be conscripted into the military. So like a lot of times, like certain laws in the US or just certain things just really do not make sense. Someone said Andrew Tate. I can't stand Andrew Tate. He's just a classic case of like a misogynistic man gone wild. Everyone's eating it up on social media. I think the scariest aspect of it is like young people are like eating up Andrew Tate's content and like his messaging, and that's like the scariest part, because those are the people that are the most vulnerable, and those are the people that are going to change the world and are eventually going to be adults soon. I would hope that most of us don't take Andrew Tate seriously. Would you date someone who's not Muslim? I personally wouldn't. In Islam, women are not really supposed to marry non-Muslims. I do want to raise my kids Muslim, and I think it's really difficult raising kids in like interfaith household. It is challenging, like especially if you have like two people that are married, like a Muslim and a Christian married, and they have kids. Like one person better be like lukewarm in their faith, otherwise those kids are going to be hella confused. I'm just saying. I'm not saying people can't do it and can't be successful with it, because I'm sure there have been cases where people are successful with it, but like it is just very challenging. Hijab for non-Muslims. So this is something that's been like kind of like a TikTok controversy as of late, and I saw this TikTok like a couple months ago of this like Christian girl who just decided to start wearing the hijab because she wanted to practice modesty. There was another situation my sister was telling me about the other day where this girl also started wearing hijab, and then she got mad at like the Muslim community for comparing the headscarf that she was wearing, the khimar that she was wearing, to a hijab. I personally, I'm like not gonna sit here and be like, yeah, Muslims own the hijab. Like if you want to start dressing modestly, and the way that you're dressing modestly reflects the way that Muslim women dress modestly, who am I to stop you? I definitely do not think that like putting on a headscarf is any type of appropriation unless you're doing it in a very disrespectful way. So like an example of this was like when you see countries like France where there's like a hijab ban, but then you see like French designers like wearing hijab to be like fashionable, including hijab in their runways. Like that is like such a clear slap in the face and such a disrespect to the hijab. So I think like there should be a form of respect shown for the headscarf, and when that respect is missing, that's when it turns into appropriation. So I think as long as people are being respectful with the headscarf, anyone can wear a headscarf if they want to. Like it's really like, I'm not going to be out here policing people and deciding who can dress modestly and who can't. And I think it is just so admirable to see. Personally, it warms my heart to see. I think a lot of the times too, like people forget how similar Christianity, Islam, and Judaism really are. Like there are a lot of similarities across the religions. Even just the stories, like the biblical stories, are like pretty much the same in Islam. People forget that Christians themselves used to practice modesty in a similar way that Muslims do. So it is also a part of their religion, even if they're not practicing it in the same way over time. Do you speak Fulani? I don't speak Fulani. I understand it. I understand a lot of it. Actually, the language that my parents speak at home is Fulani. So I understand a lot of it, but I'm not really the best at speaking. African diaspora wars. My God. I didn't realize how bad African diaspora wars were until this year, you guys. It's something that I came to the realization of when I went to college, because I went to a lot of like African cultural events this year, some of which include like the East African Culture Show at San Jose State, the fake African wedding that I went to at Stanford. And a lot of the times when I went to those events, like I would post about it on my TikTok, and why would those TikTok videos go viral? And then I would look at the comment section and it would be people just beefing and dragging each other, ripping each other's cultures apart in the comment section. It was genuinely so sick. And it's really disheartening to see. Like I've always grown up in the background of like just never being surrounded by other Africans. I've always been very much a minority within a minority. Like the high school that I went to barely had any black people, let alone Africans. Like I think I was probably like one of the only Africans in my high school. And so coming to college, like meeting other Africans in community has been like such a beautiful experience and like such a rewarding experience. So to see people like tearing one another apart and bringing back a lot of the conflict from at home into the diaspora is just honestly sick. Like I have no tolerance for it at all whatsoever. The most recent situation was I posted a TikTok of a picture of like my sisters and I wearing melefe, because we went to the East African Culture Show at UCLA, and we wore melefe there because in Mauritania, like we wear melefe, but then also other countries like Sudan, some places in Mali, even some places in Algeria wear the melefe as well. It's worn in Western Sahara, like it's not just worn in Mauritania and Sudan. We took pictures at the event, and then I made one of those TikToks because there was like a TikTok trend of like people posting a picture of them in their cultural clothes, and then the next slide be with a number, and then the next slide being a list of like West African or African countries and like where they're from. I posted that, and as a joke I made the caption West African supremacy, because the trend was specifically at the time just like West African countries. It was a joke, but it was like completely blown out of proportion in the comment section because it just turned into like East versus West, and the types of comments that were coming from a lot of people were just outright disgusting. Like people talking about how like Mauritanians were walking around naked while Sudan was wearing the tobe, like people arguing about where the melefe started first, like if it started on the west or the east. And it's like just honestly it was all garbage, to be honest, because I really don't care what country started wearing the melefe first. I don't think it necessarily matters. Even thinking about the way that borders were drawn in Africa, that was all colonization, that was all the white man. So a lot of the times our cultures, the clothes that we wear, the food that we eat, the languages that we speak, the tribes, the ethnicities that we have, we see them across different countries. There are similarities across different countries because of the way that borders were drawn by colonization, and because of the way that a lot of the times a lot of ethnic tribes in Africa were nomadic. Like I'm part Fulani, and Fulanis were nomadic. Moors were also nomadic. You'll find Fulanis in countries all across of Africa, not just in Mauritania. And so the idea that like certain clothes, certain food necessarily belongs to a certain country and that other countries wearing it, that it's not a part of their culture, or that they're appropriating it, is actually disgusting, and I just do not tolerate on any level. And seeing those comments were, to be honest, were very disheartening. So to me it's crazy not only to like bring conflicts from the motherland to the diaspora and like let that affect the way that you perceive or the way that you treat other Africans in the diaspora, but then also just having a superiority complex about your country over other countries. Crazy to me. Already we are probably some of the most oppressed people, being black people a lot of the times, or just being black, being African. We are some of the most oppressed people in the world. Y'all want to go even a step further and start oppressing yourselves? Like, that is just crazy to me. Muslims that don't want to marry outside of their race or ethnicity. This is something that I've seen a lot of, surprisingly. Like, I didn't realize actually how very common it is that people will just be racist. I did not realize until I was older how common it is for people to just not be open to the idea of marrying outside of their ethnicity, out of their race, out of their culture. I will give you this. I understand where people are coming from sometimes, where they like want to be with someone of the same culture because they share that similar culture. They want a life partner that's going to share like the same culture that they're coming from. I think it does bring up a lot of red flags sometimes when I see certain people who are like opposed to like certain races, because it just screams racism, or specific families that like have children that like want to get married to one another but they're saying no simply because of their race or where they come from. I think this is an area where a lot of anti-blackness can occur in the Muslim community, and it's really disheartening to see. It's really sad to see. I just don't necessarily really understand it. I think also it's very shocking to see people who were born and raised in the US too, who are just like adopting a lot of these like closed-minded beliefs about culture and ethnicity and race playing into marriage, because it's like our parents might not have an excuse because, you know, they came from like a specific background, but like we were born here. We're supposed to have more open minds when it comes to this. It just frustrates me a lot of the times, and I think sometimes people perpetuate this idea that like in Islam, like you're supposed to get married to someone of the same culture or ethnicity or race as you, when that is not the case at all. In Islam, there's a verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I made you of different tribes so you can get to know one another. I think people a lot of the times fail to see that marriage can be a way to like unite cultures, and it's so beautiful seeing like people coming from different racial and cultural backgrounds together and like raising kids in this like blended family of multiple cultures. And so to be honest, I think it's very outdated. I think it's very closed-minded, and it's an easy way for some people to like hold on to racist or colorist beliefs. I think a lot of the times, like no matter how woke someone might see, you can really see their true colors based on like who they're willing to marry and who they're not willing to marry. This is something that like I feel like I especially see in the Mauritanian community, because a lot of the times, like even within Mauritanian culture, there are specific ethnic tribes or specific castes that won't get married to one another simply because of the ethnicity they were born to or the caste that they were born to. This is literally in 2023. To me, it is just so disgusting to see. The Barbie AI inaccuracies. So this is referring to the whole BuzzFeed article that came out last week that published Barbies from every single country. They also posted an article 2 weeks ago about Barbie dream houses from every country, and I was so excited when I saw this. Like I immediately scrolled to the M section and I looked up the Mauritanian Barbie and the Mauritanian Barbie house. I was a huge fan of Barbie growing up. I was obsessed with Barbies. I went through like a very elongated Barbie phase. I've seen like pretty much every Barbie movie in existence. Very excited for the Barbie live action movie, and I guess this is like a part of like the Barbie movies promo is like coming out with this list of Barbies from like every different country. Growing up seeing like such a lack of representation when it comes to Barbie, it was really exciting to get this opportunity to like see a Barbie that's supposed to come from my culture. Like that's something that I never thought I would get to see. So it was really disappointing to see just a lot of the inaccuracies that came out from this project, and I think a lot of it just kind of points to the fact that like this was made by artificial intelligence at the end of the day, and they didn't take the time to really like fact check whether or not these Barbies were accurate to the different cultures that they were supposed to represent, which is such a disservice and such a missed opportunity, because this was such a cool project, and I feel like it was such a great way to just like fix media representation in a way that is so meaningful, especially to people like young girls. But there are a bunch of Barbies that just flat out inaccurate, like culturally inaccurate. There was a lot of whitewashing, especially with some of the Latinx Barbies. There was a lot of racial stereotypes. Like I think the Russian and the South Sudan Barbie had like literally a rifle in their arms. There were certain Barbies where it was like fully just not like the correct background or the correct setting. Even when I was looking at the Mauritanian Barbie, I was quite surprised, because while they kind of got the vibe right, like I was expecting to see like a Barbie like either wearing a melefa or wearing some type of like traditional African clothing, but I didn't really see that. Oh my god, the one that took me out was like some of the Emirati Barbies and like the Gulf Barbies fully wearing like dressed in men's clothing, and then some of the other like Barbies that were supposed to come from like Arab countries, just like their hijab was just not a hijab, and it was just weird. Like it was like, what is that? Like what did you put on that Barbie's head? Because that is not a headscarf. So it was just like really interesting to see the project, and I guess I don't know, it makes me sad because it was such a cool opportunity. I was really excited at the prospect of the project, but I think again it just points to this whole conversation of like AI and art. Like AI really does do a disservice to art, and AI is not it can replace a lot of things in our society, but one thing it can't replace is creativity and something that really does come from a human heart. Standards of beauty. I think standards of beauty are just so harmful. Can we all just agree to like devalue certain standards of beauty? I think it's important, like if you live in a place where you don't necessarily fit into like the ideal of what the standard of beauty is, to just remind yourself that like different places have different standards of beauty. You might not fit into the standard of beauty in the country that you live in, or in the state that you live in, or the region that you live in, but you might be exactly the standard of beauty in a different place. And so just remind yourself of that, and just remind yourself that like standards of beauty is literally a social construct, and beauty is something so minuscule to value, because when you think about it, like it literally fades. It holds so much power in our society, especially in the West. People are spending so much money on procedures to like preserve their beauty for as long as possible, but beauty fades at the end of the day. Like at a certain point, everyone's beauty goes away. And I think like something that I have just had to unlearn over the years is that beauty is such a meaningless, to me, like characteristic to have so much value of. Like a lot of the times women aren't really valued for things like intelligence, for ambition. A lot of the times I feel like women's beauty just gets overvalued over other important qualities. Do yourself a favor and just devalue it. Getting married young. I think there's a lot of the time a lot of judgment towards people who get married young, and while it's something that I personally like don't see myself doing, I definitely don't think that people should be judged for getting married young, especially in Islam, like when they're just doing like the halal thing to do. I just think that it's important that if you are someone who is getting married young and you have these like career ambitions or these certain life ambitions, like it's important to not compromise those and still make those a priority. It's definitely going to be harder for you, I feel like, to still focus on yourself and to still focus on your career ambitions. Like for example, if you're like getting married while you're still in school, like that is going to be a lot more challenging than if you weren't. But I also do think like marriage does look differently, and that's something that I'm realizing now that I'm older, is like marriage doesn't look the same for everyone. You know, sometimes people do things like long distance marriages. Sometimes people in Islam will get their nikah done, but they won't necessarily get their like legal marriage done. So like it's like different for different people. You know, we're not really supposed to judge people's life decisions. I don't think that people should rush into marriage very hastily or quickly. But I definitely think that like if I see two people that are getting married young, I feel like just props to them for knowing what they want at a young age. Sure, it's a lot riskier, like there's more of a risk that it won't work out, but also I think there's already such a high risk in the first place when it comes to marriage, and marriage not working out is not necessarily the end of the world. I'm definitely coming from a culture where like divorce is not necessarily stigmatized. Like it's actually kind of funny because the other day a New York Times article came out about Mauritania and like divorces being celebrated in Mauritania, but like while I think that was a little bit of an exaggeration, I would definitely say that divorce in Mauritanian culture is not stigmatized at all. I do think Mauritania is on one end of an extreme when it comes to like the spectrum of things, where they like, I think they resort to divorce a little too quickly, and they divorce to the point where like marriage is almost like not even like respected as an institution. But I definitely don't think that like divorce should be something that you are afraid of partaking in or that you feel like is a bad thing. I don't think people should be shamed for getting divorced. Like marriages don't work out all the time, and that's not necessarily like a reflection of the people in that marriage, like a direct reflection of the people. I just don't understand the concept of like shaming people for wanting to do something like getting divorced. Why should you be forced to be stuck in a marriage that you're not happy in? I don't understand it. I think people should be allowed to do what they want. If they want to get married young, let them get married young. I think it's just important to like, before you're going into marriage, like you understand the gravity of it and like what that could mean, the commitment, the level of commitment, and how that might change your life and like all of your options. I also know that like age is different for everyone, and that like people are at different levels of maturity at different ages, and people are also mature in different ways at different ages too. So like my level of maturity, or like when I would necessarily feel ready for marriage, is gonna look different than like someone else walking down the street. That wraps up all of the controversial topics that you guys were curious about. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and comment down below what are some of your guys' thoughts on some of the topics that we talked about today. If you guys want me to do this again and make this a series, definitely let me know. Make sure to subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.